Back in 2023, I upgraded from my very trusty Sony A7 III to its successor, the Sony A7 IV. I've taken over 50,000 photos on it in the year that I've had it, and it's the camera that I use for literally everything, from street photography to filming these YouTube videos and also doing client work. And I've gotten to know this camera pretty well in the year since I've had it, so in this video, I want to talk about my experience using the A7 IV, specifically for street photography, but also how I have mine set up for hybrid shooting, some of the pros and cons about this camera, and if I plan to upgrade to the rumored A7V in the near future. So let's get into it. When I was deciding what camera to buy after selling my Sony A6300, I ended up going with the A7 III because at the time it was one of the best hybrid cameras that you can buy, but since its release, camera technology improved a significant amount, so after using it for a couple of years, it was time for me to upgrade, and I got the A7 IV, which was released in 2021. I wanted to stay within the Sony ecosystem because I had, obviously acquired a lot of lenses for it and accessories, and it was just what I knew best, so it just made sense for me to stay and not have to sell everything off to go to a different brand. I also knew that I would keep the A7 III as a backup to the A7 IV, so it was nice knowing that I could use the same lenses and accessories and batteries and, not have to buy any new kind of gear. The improvements that I was looking forward to the most with the A7 IV was the new menu system, the new flip screen, and most importantly, the improved autofocus. So because I switched from photo to video quite a bit, I thought it'd be good to show you how I have my camera set up for hybrid shooting in order to quickly switch between modes and reduce the risk of missing a scene that I want to capture, whether that's through a photo or in a video clip. Okay, so my photo setting is programmed to M on the dial because I used to shoot fully manual and I wanted complete control of my exposure. But recently I started shooting auto ISO, which has saved me a lot of time. I have my ISO range set from 100 to 3200, and when I'm shooting during the daytime, I usually do like to underexpose by 0.3 or 0.7, and depending on the light. And then when I'm shooting indoors or at night, I just bring it back to 0. When it comes to metering, depending on the light that I'm in, I'm either in highlight priority, if I'm shooting in harsh light and I want those dark silhouettes and blacks, but other times I am in multi-metering when the light is constantly changing and I'm switching from indoor to outdoor areas. I set my custom 1 button to toggle on silent shooting in cases where I'm in a really quiet place, like a subway or anywhere indoors, but I want to get a shot without drawing attention to myself because the shutter on this camera is pretty loud compared to other cameras and brands that I've tested. I programmed my custom 2 button up top to be a quick switch for my focus areas when I need to switch between zone and spot focus, depending on the photos that I'm trying to shoot. If I'm walking through like a crowd where there are a lot of moving parts, I find it better to be in zone focus mode with an aperture somewhere between 6.3 and f8, with a higher shutter speed that I usually set to around 1/800th of a second to freeze the motion. When I'm kind of camped out in one spot and I have a specific area of the frame that I want to get a subject to walk through or something to happen, I'll spot focus on that area so that way the camera doesn't decide to focus in a different zone when a moment occurs or something moves. The C3 button is my focus mode, which I'm basically always in continuous autofocus. My auto exposure lock button here at the corner is actually programmed to be my crop center toggle. So if I'm shooting on a prime lens, but I want to get a tighter shot, then I'll turn that on and it'll crop by 1.5. So I can turn my 50mm into a 75mm, but obviously you are losing resolution when you do that. My AF on button here is simply a back button focus. Lastly, the trash button or the custom 4 button is to turn on touch operation on the screen. So when I use it, which is not that often, I really only use it to move around my focus point. But aside from that, this function usually stays off. I always shoot my photos in RAW, and when I'm doing client work, I have 2 SD cards in the camera, and I make sure that the files are being written simultaneously onto each of the cards in case one of them were to corrupt. Now, I don't do this for street photography, and I probably should, but because I use 128 gigabyte cards, if I fill up that first one and I want to continue shooting, I do need a fresh second one, so that's why I don't, copy them simultaneously, because I do want more storage if I need it. If I want to switch over to video from photo, all I have to do is simply press this in and slide it over to the video icon there. My main video setting is programmed to M on the dial as well, because that's what I'm shooting my photos in, so I want to just keep the switch as quick as possible. And my main video settings are in 4K, 24 frames a second, in S-Log3 with 10-bit color. This is the standard for me, and I'm basically always shooting this way, but the only problem with shooting in S-Log3 is that the base ISO is 800. So if I'm shooting photos during the day and I switch from photo to video, the image is pretty overexposed because I don't use an ND for photos. So I either have to crank the aperture down to like f/22, which doesn't always do the trick, or I have to put an ND filter on the lens to get proper exposure. So that can be a bit of a hindrance, but I'm looking into getting a magnetic filter set, so I'm able to just pop it on there when I need it and make it way quicker. If I turn this dial to 1 while in video mode, it switches into my 1080p mode at 24 frames, also in S-Log3 and 10-bit color. If I turn the dial to 2, it switches to 1080p at 60 frames per second for any time I want to slow footage down in post. And if I switch the dial to 3, I go into 4K at 60 frames, which I almost never do since it does crop in, but I have it there if I need it. Now, when I bought this camera, I knew I needed a hybrid, as it would be my main workhorse for all different kinds of work. And when it comes to the conversation of street photography cameras, I would venture to say that most people don't exactly care about the video capabilities of a camera. If they're not filming at all, if they're not into filming, or they're not doing YouTube, and that makes total sense. And I think that's one of the reasons that this camera doesn't get talked about in the same conversation as cameras such as, the Fuji X100VI or the XT line or the X Pro line, or some of the higher end Leica, like the M11P or M11 or M10 or whatever it is, and like even the Nikon ZF. But I do think there are features on the A7IV that are very beneficial to most street photographers. First of all, you're getting a 33 megapixel full frame sensor that allows you to retain really good image quality if you decide to crop in, over, let's say, your standard 24 megapixel sensor. I crop a lot of photos, so having that extra resolution is good if I ever decide I want to print my work. Ergonomically, the camera fits really well in my hand, and when you have a smaller lens on it, it's really not that big or heavy of a kit, and I'm able to, shoot with it all day and have no issues. The battery life on Sony's is also fantastic. I can go a whole day's worth of photos on one single battery, so if you're not doing any video, you can get by on 1 or 2 depending on your style of shooting. You also have a wide variety of lenses to choose from because Sony allows third-party manufacturers such as Tamron and Sigma, Samyang, Viltrox, etc. to make glass for the E-mount system. So if you're like me and you like testing out different focal lengths and lenses, you can do that on a budget, and you don't have to pay a premium for the Sony glass because there is probably a cheaper option. Granted, you might not get all the bells and whistles, and the quality might be a little bit lower, but you're saving a lot of money. I only owned one Sony lens, and all the rest are third party. A few videos ago, I had my friend Austin hold the A7IV and give me some of his quick first impressions of the camera, and this is what he said. So what are like your first impressions of like holding that camera? Like what would you think about it?
It just feels like, I don't know how to explain it. It feels like a tool. Best way
instead of like an artistic thing, right?
I'm sure I could still get good photos with it. I just would have to get used to, it just feels like really the grip is very deep. It's just completely different than anything that I've shot with.
Feels like
so
too
far.
Professional almost, right?
In a way, yeah, kind of at least for what I'm used to. It feels really good though. It's very fast.
Yeah.
That's
responsive.
The most noticeable thing about it is it's so fast. Processor inside it feels like the computer of it feels fast. I feel like the main thing I don't like about it is, basically what we're talking about. It's just I mean, I'm sure I'd get used to it.
robotic in a way.
It feels like, yeah, robotic's probably a good way to put it.
So I think having a camera with a fast processor is a good thing for street photography if that is something of importance to you. Obviously, some people prefer slower methods of shooting, and you adjust to the system that you're shooting on, so it may not be for everyone. And through all these good features that I just mentioned, I slowly came to a realization, which is that this camera recently has felt a lot more like a tool than a fun and inspiring piece of gear. Now, all cameras are tools, but at the end of the day, some feel like paintbrushes, while others feel like screwdrivers. That is my very bad attempt at being poetic. The specs on the A7 IV are great, and it's a very reliable camera, but I just feel like it lacks a certain type of character. Initially, when I upgraded from the A7 III to the A7 IV, it was super fun to use because I was, getting all these new improvements on the camera, and I still love the photos and videos that this camera produces, but as I've progressed in my career as a street photographer, this camera has felt more and more robotic. And because I use this camera for other kinds of work as well, it has felt more like a work camera, and it's made me yearn for something a bit different for street photography. And I'm not exactly sure what that is, and I'm not in a position to buy a new camera because this one works perfectly fine. But I think, partially the reason why I got a Ricoh not too long ago and a couple different film cameras is because I wanted something new and different. But if I were to buy a street photography dedicated camera now, I'm not sure this would be the one. So should you get an A7 IV for street photography? If you're already in the Sony ecosystem and you already shoot video and you want something that's a little bit more photo capable, then I think this is one of the best cameras for that. This is also a really good camera for anyone who's already doing a ton of photo but is potentially thinking about venturing into video later down the line, because you won't have to buy a new camera because this one is very video capable. And a good alternative to the A7 IV is the A7C II, which is basically the same internals with a few less features in a more compact body if that's your thing. But if you're someone who doesn't care about video and you're more interested in the overall shooting experience, then I probably wouldn't get this one. I love the performance of this camera, and I like using Sony in general because of the autofocus and all the third-party lens options, and obviously it's a bit hard to leave after acquiring all the lenses and accessories over the past couple of years of shooting on the system. I've been shooting with Sonys for the last 6 years, so I'm really accustomed to the overall layout of the camera and the workflow and the files, and I don't see myself ditching the brand at all, but possibly adding a different kind of camera to the kit. The A7 IV is rumored to either be released or announced in the next few months, apparently in Q1 of 2025, and I'm not exactly sure what kind of improvements the 5 will have over the 4. I assume it might be related to things like autofocus and AI and, speed, and in that case, I don't think I'll be upgrading to the 5. I think the 4 is serving me perfectly fine as a hybrid camera, and I don't need anything else or anything better for now. If I do get a new camera sometime soon, it most likely won't be a hybrid. It'll be a camera that is fun and inspiring but very capable to use in the streets. I would love to see Fuji make an X Pro 4 because I've heard a lot of good things about that line. I would also love to see Sony revive the RX1R line because the RX1R2 came out in 2015, I believe, and since then we've had this craze for compact cameras, and I think a Mark III at a good price point would be very interesting to me and to a lot of other people as well. I'm not a gear nerd whatsoever, and I'd like to be, I just can't afford to be one just yet. But I do know that when it comes to buying a camera, it's not about buying the best one. It's about buying the right one that inspires you to go out and shoot, and it's something that you actually enjoy using. The A7 IV is a great camera, and I don't see myself needing to upgrade from it in the near future, but that doesn't mean I won't be potentially looking to add a photo dedicated camera to my street photography workflow if I were to find one that makes sense. Before I close out this video, I do want to mention that all the photos that you saw in today's video and all my photos in general are edited with my MS F1 presets for Lightroom, so if you're interested in those, I'll link them down below in the description. Thank you so much for watching, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.